Helium's physics, born underground, gone to space. To understand why that scanner screamed, we go back into the rock. Helium isn't mined like copper, it's born as fallout from radioactive decay. Deep in crustal minerals, uranium and thorium spit alpha particles, bear helium nuclei into the lattice. They slow, steal electrons, turn into helium atoms, and start a jailbreak, out of crystals into pores toward any seal tight enough to trap them with natural gas. Now the catch. Helium is the second lightest thing in the universe and the least social. It barely interacts, won't stick to much, and in the upper atmosphere the fastest fraction just leaves. Gravity can't hang on forever. On human timescales, our planet leaks helium like a punctured balloon. There's no factory that fixes that. Stars make helium by fusion. We don't. We either intercept it underground when geology piles up enough in the right places, or we lose it forever. That's the scarcity. The utility comes from its temperament. Helium's electron shell is full, so it sits out chemical drama. It doesn't burn, doesn't corrode, doesn't gunk lines. In chipmaking, that calm behavior protects fragile plasmas and sweeps oxygen away from processes where oxygen would wreck atom-thick layers. In spaceflight, helium pressurizes cryogenic fuel tanks and purges plumbing that can't risk a spark. Reliability loves a gas that refuses to react. But the liquid is the deal-breaker. At 4.2 Kelvin, helium liquefies without freezing. Push toward 2 Kelvin and it goes superfluid, no viscosity, climbing walls, slipping through micro-leaks, hauling heat in ways nothing else can. Superconducting magnets live there. Warm them a little, they quench, snapping back to electrical resistance, dumping stored energy as heat and shock. Liquid helium is the moat that keeps that dragon asleep. Nitrogen at 77 Kelvin is a sweater in a snowstorm. Neon is scarce and heavy. Hydrogen is cold, sure, but near oxygen it's an accident report. If you need 4 Kelvin at scale, substitutes run out fast. So MRIs live by helium. A clinical magnet holds 1,000 liters or more. Modern zero boil-off designs recondense helium gas back to liquid with built-in cryocoolers, stretching time between fills, but the bath still anchors the system. Lose too much and you're scheduling a controlled warm-up and rebuild. In a hospital, that means canceled scans and rescheduled surgeries. In research, rationing means paused experiments and lost beamtime windows. In fabs, allocation notices force engineers to rewrite recipes, shaving helium use and accepting slower throughput to survive the week. There's another trap. Helium piggybacks on natural gas, and most gas fields carry trivial traces, parts per million you'd never extract. A few places have enough, thanks to ancient basement rocks, uranium-rich sources, and tight seals that bottled it up for geologic ages. That's the Panhandle Hijacked trend under Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, pockets in the Rockies, Algeria's Hassi Armel, Qatar's North Field, and Russia's Siberian plains. Producers strip helium during gas processing. If a plant shuts for maintenance, helium supply shuts too. If an LNG train trips, the helium welded to it goes dark that day. Even after capture, helium punishes sloppiness. The atoms slip through seals, liquid finds leaks you didn't know you had. Every transfer, liquefier to doer, doer to ISO container, container to instrument, skims off a loss. Boil-off never sleeps, you only slow it. Delay a container in heat and you're bleeding product into the air. That's why operators obsess over vacuum-jacketed lines, quick connects, and reclaim systems. The best labs recycle. Capture boil-off, compress it, clean it, and reliquefy. It's expensive to build and cheap compared with losing weeks of work. Why not pull helium from air? It's there at roughly 5 parts per million. Technically, you can strip it with cryogenic columns or membranes. Economically, you're pushing mountains of air for a trickle, possible only if electricity is cheap and prices soar. Could we make helium in reactors? Alpha particles form helium inside fuel and cladding, but recovering that isn't a supply chain, it's a materials headache. For the foreseeable future, geology sets the menu. Human habits layered on that physics, and they weren't careful. Years of stable prices trained hospitals to vent boil-off and labs to run open doers. Fabs treated helium as a line item, not a single point of failure. Shortages unlearn those habits fast. Hospitals retrofit better shields and serviceable cryocoolers. Universities pool budgets for campus liquefiers and teach zero-loss fills. Chipmakers co-fund recovery at upstream gas processors and add reclaim loops in etch bays. None of this is free. All of it is cheaper than shutting down. Meanwhile, global structure matters. The United States built a unique helium world, pipe, storage, enrichment that buffered shocks for decades. Qatar attached helium to some of the cheapest LNG on Earth, turning low concentrations into real tonnage with scale and reliability. Russia planned Arctic volumes that would swing the market, then ran into sanctions, spares, and timelines that slipped. Each pillar has different failure modes. When two wobble at once, you feel it in emergency rooms and at launch pads, not just in price charts. Hold two truths at once. Helium is a byproduct market, and helium that escapes is gone. That combination creates thin margins, hard constraints, and stakes that land on people, not abstractions. The MRI tech who hears a magnet scream, the process engineer shaving purge time at 3 a.m., the launch director staring at a frozen countdown, they're all writing the same physics, and the physics doesn't care what we planned. The federal helium machine, how war built a buffer. To see how a hospital's schedule ends up tied to a Texas cavern, we have to walk into a century where lift and fire shaped policy. After World War I, the U.S. Navy wanted airships that wouldn't turn into torches. Hydrogen was out. Helium's one superpower, it doesn't burn, suddenly mattered more than cost. That single property pulled helium out of lab glassware and into national strategy. Geologists mapped seeps across the Great Plains. The Panhandle and Hijacked trend stood out. Old basement rocks, uranium nearby, seals tight enough to catch the leaks of a million years. By the 1930s, blimps were coastal sentries, and helium was sneaking into radar benches and rocket test stands. World War II didn't invent the demand, it normalized it. The Cold War then scaled it into infrastructure. Balloons that surfed the jet stream, missile labs with cryogenic plumbing, liquid oxygen tanks that had to be purged clean and inert. Helium threaded through all of it. When a system needed an ultra-cold, non-reactive handler, the short list usually landed on the same element. Washington built hardware around that reality. Outside Amarillo, engineers took a depleted gas reservoir, Bush Dome, and turned it into a bank. The concept was audacious and simple. Private plants would strip crude helium out of natural gas streams, mostly nitrogen and methane with a few % helium, then push that crude into a federal artery, the Panhandle pipeline. Down the line, refiners would plug in, draw feedstock, and upgrade it to high-purity product for dewars and ISO containers. At the midpoint, the cliffside plant enriched the mixed stream so storage and redelivery made sense. Bush Dome itself became the swing. Inject when supply outran demand, withdraw when the system hiccuped. On paper, it looked like a warehouse. In control rooms, it felt like an instrument. Operators matched pressures across hundreds of miles, nudging valves as compressors in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas rose and fell. If a private plant tripped at midnight, Cliffside bled a little stored helium into the flow, and a refiner in Kansas kept loading tankers. A defense contractor welded beneath an inert blanket as if nothing happened. The reserve wasn't just hedging. It was a living machine that shaved volatility off every shift. Policy adjusted as the machine matured. Amendments in the 1960s shifted the federal role from sole producer to stabilizer and buyer of last resort. Conservation wasn't a poster. It meant don't vent if you can pipe it, and don't count on luck to cover strategic programs. Private companies, Air Products, Praxair, and others built refineries along the line because the crude feed would be there and the check would clear. Geography became leverage. The pipeline didn't only move molecules, it moved time. Producers saw a steady sink, users saw a steady source. Spaceflight turned steady into essential. Atlas and Titan families needed helium to pressurize propellant tanks. Purge lines at Cape Canaveral had to stay clean and non-reactive. Cryogenic tests demanded an inert, ultra-cold servant. The helium machine hummed under every headline. By the time MRIs rolled into hospitals, the network already had muscle memory. A doer leaving Liberal, Kansas might cool a superconducting magnet in Seattle 2 days later, and nobody outside the loading dock thought about Texas caverns. Micro story, a technician at Cliffside wrote +12 psi hold on a log at 2:11 a.m. after a Panhandle compressor stumbled. 2 time zones away, a university's NMR magnet took a clean fill. The grad student hit start, and her spectrum came out crisp. She never knew the reserve took the punch. There was a cost hidden in ledgers. The program carried a helium debt. Infrastructure, stored gas, decades of operations, valued by methods only appropriators loved, added up to a number that haunted budget hearings. Engineers pointed to uptime graphs, accountants pointed to columns. The compromise would come later: pay down the debt by selling helium, privatize the system, let markets decide. But before anyone pulled that lever, the machine did the job it was built to do. It taught a generation that helium arrived on time because a federal pipeline and a salt cavern made it so. That reliability created habits. Producers invested around the pipe. Distributors promised service windows with a straight face. Hospitals scheduled patients assuming a doer would show before the weekend. Labs planned beam time and builds without backup liquefiers. The buffer wasn't visible, so the risk felt imaginary. The irony is clean. A wartime design built to stop airships from burning ended up underwriting civilian medicine and science for half a century. When that buffer later became an asset to be sold rather than a function to be preserved, the lesson lingered. People still expected the midnight valve to open. The physics hadn't changed. The governance had. The 1996 Helium Privatization Act, signals jammed. The law arrived like housekeeping. Pay back a $1.3 billion helium debt, shrink Washington's footprint, let markets handle the rest. Inside the fine print sat the fuse. Interior had to sell most federal helium at a formula price designed to amortize that debt. Not what the molecule was worth on a tight day. What a spreadsheet said it needed to be. The signal that tells investors to build and users to conserve got flattened into a payment plan. Hear what that does to real choices. You're a Rockies gas processor eyeing a helium recovery skid. Capital in the millions. It only pencils if helium holds value for years. But Panhandle barrels are flowing at a formula price that undercuts scarcity. You stall. A university lab asks for a campus liquefier quote. The business office compares it to cheap deliveries and declines. An MRI buyer weighs a zero boil-off premium and says maybe next cycle. A policy aimed at repaying a ledger entry quietly trains the entire chain to ignore risk. Meanwhile, the machine still worked until it didn't. As the mandated sell-down fed cheap molecules into the pipeline, private plants and refiners built schedules around a floor that looked solid. Distributors locked in take-or-pay contracts. Hospitals wrote service agreements pegged to steady refill rates. Labs budgeted helium as if it were oxygen. Then planned maintenance overlapped with unplanned trips. Algeria's Hassi Armel took a turnaround. A U.S. plant tripped. Allocations arrived. Prices spiked, but not in a way that screamed, invest now. They screamed, duck. Behavior lagged the reality. A decade of soft pricing dulled survival instincts. Hospital procurement optimized pennies per liter, not redundancy. Fab managers didn't qualify helium lean recipes until the day they had to. Principal investigators wrote grant timelines that assumed doers would roll like clockwork. Producers who might have built new recovery units looked at a federal competitor emptying its vault on a schedule and thought, why race a subsidized clock? Congress tried to course correct. The 2013 Helium Stewardship Act introduced auctions and a glide path. Keep the pipes running, auction a slice each year to reveal price, and reserve a small cushion for critical users. Bids jumped. Scarcity finally printed on paper. But auctions can't conjure plants that weren't built a decade earlier. Compressors you didn't order in 2004 don't ship in 2014. The Panhandle network still mattered, but its role had shifted. Less public shock absorber, more privatizing utility. Then the squeezes stacked. In 2012-2013, shortage 2 arrived when U.S. outages and Algerian maintenance overlapped. In 2017, the Gulf diplomatic rift strangled Qatar's helium exports for weeks, and roughly a quarter of global supply vanished from the spot market. In 2019, reliability wobbled again. In 2022, a leak at the federal site throttled output just as Russia's invasion scrambled hopes for Amur's new volumes and bent shipping routes into slow arcs that bled boil off. Each event was the kind of hiccup the old reserve used to swallow. Without that buffer, a compressor trip in Texas could echo in a radiology suite in Ohio by Friday. Micro story: at 9:06 a.m., a hospital MRI manager read an allocation email, half the usual fill. She pulled the days list, a pediatric anesthesia slot, stroke follow-ups, and oncology workup. She called facilities to open the freight elevator after midnight pre-chilled transfer lines to cut flash loss and begged a neighboring hospital for 150 liters. The scans happened. The margin was a rumor. The perverse part is that the 1996 law initially kept prices tame. That calm encouraged waste just as the structural cushion thinned. Vent lines stayed open. Recovery projects waited for next year. Semiconductor purge recipes ran fat. When reality broke through, everyone discovered their runway was measured in days. The system didn't fail all at once. It taught fragile habits, then removed the safety net. After auctions nudged prices toward truth, behavior finally moved. Fabs co-funded upstream recovery and installed in-bay reclaim. Universities pooled budgets for campus liquefiers, zero-loss bayonets, and better SOPs. MRI makers leaned into sealed, recondensing designs and serviceable shields. Rocket programs qualified helium lean purge sequences and thicker pads. Each step cost money. Each should have happened years earlier. Price discovery came late. Physics was on time. So what did the law really do? In narrow terms, it paid down the debt and advanced privatization. In system terms, it jammed the feedback loop. A strategic buffer built to stabilize wartime programs became an inventory to be sold at a number divorced from scarcity. Producers delayed. Users overspent on waste and underspent on resilience. When the cupboard was thin, a few valves and weather patterns decided whether a kid's scan slipped a week. The lesson isn't that markets can't manage helium. It's that markets without clean signals and a small, smart buffer will train bad habits, then punish them. The Panhandle still moves molecules. Qatar still rides LNG. Russia still promises tomorrow. But if the price can't say build when it should, and if no public cushion can absorb a routine outage, the countdown will keep freezing at T18 while a tech somewhere hears a magnet whisper minutes. Chokepoint 1, America's Panhandle Pulse. While that law was training bad habits, the Panhandle kept doing quiet hero work. Think of it as a circulatory system more than a pipeline. Crude helium gathered from scattered gas plants, blended and enriched, then fed to refiners that bottle purity into dewars and ISO containers. On a map, it's a thin line from West Texas through Oklahoma into Kansas. In practice, it's a schedule, a memory, and a promise that tomorrow's truck won't show up empty. Because if it does, hospital scans slip and launch windows close. From a producer's perspective, the magic is time shift. Natural gas flows when it flows. Plants go down for a turbine swap, a cold snap, a power spike. The Panhandle network levels that chaos. Pressure management at cliffside and along the line turns choppy daily production into something refineries can plan around. A shift supervisor in Liberal can load pallets knowing the crude feed won't whipsaw with every hiccup 2 states away. That stability is why North American medicine and research leans so hard on Panhandle molecules. Short drive times, predictable dispatch, crews who know hospitals by name. It's a logistics culture as much as a pipe. But the hidden fragility is that the buffer function shrank. The federal role that once absorbed stumbles is now slimmer, privatized, and more exposed to maintenance windows that don't coordinate with your radiology schedule. When a compressor trips in the Panhandle at 3 p.m. on a Thursday and another plant is already in turnaround, allocations can land by Monday. The physics didn't change. The slack did. Get this, weather writes itself into the story. A Panhandle freeze can hammer electricity prices, forcing curtailments at precisely the moment cryogenic compressors need steady power. Summer heat stretches cooling systems and derates throughput. Operators juggle. Bleed pressures here, hold there, prioritize a refiner feeding hospitals over one heavy on industrial demand. That triage happens in real time with phones ringing and SCADA screens blinking. If you work in a Cleveland MRI suite, you only feel it as a vague email that says, "Your delivery will be partial." Meanwhile, aging equipment adds its own roulette. Some of those plants date back decades. Valves that have lived through 1,000 thermal cycles don't fail on a schedule. Sensors drift. Bearings complain. Private owners have improved reliability, swapped out old guts, layered on predictive maintenance. Still, 2 unplanned trips in the wrong week can erase the sense of safety the pipeline used to buy. Micro story: a Friday compressor trip upstream triggered a 48-hour allocation notice across several states. In Colorado, a lab had just commissioned a reclaim skid that morning. They rerouted boil off, banked enough to bridge the weekend, and kept a dilution fridge experiment alive. The Pi said it felt like catching a falling glass with the rim of his shoe. Logistics turns small mistakes into big losses. Every hour a full ISO waits on a hot apron, boil off climbs. Driver hours caps mean a slip at the plant can cascade into a late-night delivery that misses a hospital's elevator window, pushing the fill a day, bleeding more helium. The best operators stage dry ice, pre-cool lines, and run night fills to dodge traffic and heat. They're not romantic touches, they're survival techniques. What nobody sees is how the Panhandle anchors contract psychology. A buyer in Houston trusts a 2-day lead because the route's been run 1,000 times. Launch teams in Florida time wet dress rehearsals to trucks coming through Oklahoma. University purchasing offices approve smaller safety stock because the Panhandle has been steady. That belief supports thin buffers at the edge, just-in-time behavior built on a system that used to have fat in the middle. Then there's the software of scarcity. Who gets what when supply thins? Medical contracts often carry priority clauses. National labs have framework agreements with carve-outs. Industrial users absorb the first cuts. It's humane on paper, but it adds friction when refineries must re-rack loads, reassign drivers, and call 20 customers to explain. Every replan is a chance for another percentage point of loss. The flip side is how resilience grows from the same geography. Because the network is dense and distances short, recovery investment pays off. Plants add redundant compressors. Refineries upgrade cold boxes and sensors. A small amount of extra storage near the line buys days of cushion. Buyers install reclaim to stretch allocations into steady operation. The Panhandle's greatest weakness, limited slack, is also its greatest opportunity. Small reliability gains ripple fast. Human moment, a cliffside veteran retires after 30 years and tells the new crew, "Don't chase the needle, make the needle chase you." He means pressures. He also means instincts. When a plant upstream wobbles, you don't wait for the phone. You start shaping the flow so the downstream refiner never feels the bump. It's craft, not just controls. Here's where it gets real for end users. If you run a hospital in the Midwest, your helium probably touched that pipe. When maintenance schedules line up wrong, your outage risk rises in days, not weeks. If you install a zero-loss fill protocol and a small recovery bag now, you turn a Thursday allocation into a Friday annoyance instead of a canceled Monday. If you're a fab in Arizona, a modest reclaim loop and helium lean recipe buys independence from Panhandle weather. The Panhandle pulse still sets the North American rhythm. It's a metronome that can drift when 2 beats hit off time. A plant down and a heat wave, a valve swap and a rail delay. The solution isn't to wish for the old reserve back. It's to rebuild function. Reliability upgrades, micro buffers near demand, transparent uptime data, and end-user conservation that shrinks the amplitude of every wobble. When that happens, a compressor trip stays a line item in a control room instead of a whisper in a radiology bay. Chokepoint 2, Qatar's North Field, helium by LNG. While the Panhandle smooths time, Qatar manufactures scale. To see why, start offshore above a blue horizon that hides the North Field, one of the largest single accumulations of natural gas on Earth, part of the same reservoir Iran calls South Pars. The genius wasn't that the gas was rich in helium. It was. The genius was welding helium extraction onto some of the world's cheapest, steadiest LNG trains and letting volume do the math. Because when those trains pause, clinics and fabs and ocean away feel it. Here's how the day actually runs. Feed gas flows from the field into a complex that looks like a small city. Separation, dehydration, fractionation, refrigeration, the mile of pipe you'll never tour. Helium hitches a ride in tiny concentrations. Strip it early and you waste cold. Strip it late and you lose recovery. Qatar's Helium 1 and Helium 2 plants sit where the thermodynamics favor capture, pulling helium off as the LNG process steps down temperatures and pressures. A cryogenic column does precision work. Compressors push, cold boxes hum. Out comes crude helium, then refined, then liquid loading into ISO containers that look like white, square boats of frost.